I'm smiling because there is a bird singing outside of my window that is just so lovely. And I feel like my little companion as I start recording. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. It is morning here in LA, just about 6 a.m. almost. And I'm so excited for the opportunity to sit down and connect with you, whoever you are that may be listening. I have just been feeling a lot of creative spark around the podcast and really sitting with what I want to create in an intentional way in the world in this moment for myself and, for anyone who feels aligned with being in conversation with me in this way. And I just got back from just the most beautiful soul enriching week in Costa Rica. I was part of a multi-faculty week at Blue Spirit in Costa Rica, which is one of my favorite places that I've gone with my teacher for several years, to just immerse every year and sort of gift myself the time and space to be in some of this work of this relational work in a really intentional way. And this time, I was facilitating and oh God, just feeling in my body as I speak into what that experience was, like the felt sense of it coming back and how full I came back of the experience of community and collaboration. And, there was so much potency just in us sitting in circles together and being in commune together and fellowship. And I just came back home with such a sense of I want to do more of this, certainly in the world, but also just in what I'm creating in terms of the podcast, which is something that I feel like, and any of you who've been listening a little bit with me know, it's been a little bit of of figuring out what it is going to look like and what feels most exciting for it to look like for me, within me. And it's been a little bit of a process, but last week I put on my stories just a request for you guys, whoever is listening, to bring me in on what's alive for you and how I can be most supportive. And I really loved that because I got some really beautiful responses. And I think that feels really true in terms of what I want to be doing. I want to be in conversation. And so, yeah, I got some really great responses. And one response in particular that just really spoke to me, and I wanted to read the full response. And, if you happen to be listening, whoever sent this, thank you for this really thoughtful question, because I think it's a really beautiful jump off point for a topic for us to dive into. So I'm going to read the question. It says, I would love for you to dive more into finding wholeness without a partner, how to rebuild the healthy masculine and feminine, how to shift the inner critic, and how you've learned to forgive yourself so easily, how to step into surrender while creating the feeling of safety and security in and for yourself, how to create a joyful life when you don't know what you want next. This has been what I've been facing after going through the big stages of grief, and surrealness of a divorce I didn't choose. But regardless of being partnered, I know these struggles were habituated into my childhood and that the grief opened my heart to what I'm needing to learn. You briefly mentioned these in past episodes and reels, but I would be thrilled with more deep dives into these pillars of working towards individuation. I mean, just such a beautifully crafted, thoughtful question, first of all. So thank you. And you're right, you did touch on several pillars of what have been the most fundamental aspects of my own path to healing and a return to more wholeness. And I'm so happy to explore these themes, because in a lot of ways I think they're intertwined, and also we could do several episodes on each topic, and maybe we will, but um, mm, let's start with just this question of finding wholeness without a partner. I would say a big part of this is the remembrance of our wholeness, and that there is a part of us that long before the world conditioned us to believe that we are incomplete until someone comes along to complete us, was in the childlike space of wonder and discovery and living this life on life's terms without any sort of even idea or understanding that we were waiting for someone else to make us whole, right? And so I think it's interesting, as I was reading through several of the points of this question, right? How I learned so easily to forgive myself. And it made me a little emotional as I was reading that, because the process of forgiving myself was not at all an easy one. It's something that I have sort of trained myself to reflexively do after years of not being able to do that easily. And it's interesting. You're talking in this question about finding wholeness without a partner, but I think what it really brought up for me was my journey around learning how to be in my skin and find peace in my skin, which was really separate from my journey around relationships, even though so much of it impacts how I understand this relational work and how I show up in relationships today. My first exploration into what that means and what that looks like was really around the journey into sobriety and into learning to be in my skin without any sort of what I describe as a release valve. And, you know, some of you may know, and I've talked about in just various forms how I spent many years of my life as a wake and bake stoner. I had a love affair for many years of my life with marijuana. And, you know, for me, what that drug was what that medicine was, however you choose to speak about it, was really a way that I was able to armor up and feel safe in a world that, for multiple reasons, my sensitive soul felt really challenged feeling safe in without that armor. And when I first discovered what was really a love affair for many years of my life with marijuana, I think I felt so many of the things that people describe to me as a therapist feeling when they first fall in love with someone. Just the sense of liberation from who I am and what I am and how I show up not being enough. A sense of sort of a protective shield that I describe as sort of cloaking me in just the ability to not care what people thought of me or how I was showing up, not being the right way to show up. But, you know, as I look back on it, what it really gave me the opportunity to do was to dive deep into my own internal world, what I now sort of think of as the dark, hollowed spaces of my inner feminine, unapologetically, in a world that really does not celebrate that or hold any sort of value around the contemplative spaces. And, you know, I'm an extremely introverted person. And so there's so much about how I experience the world, just sort of taking things in and being in a lot of contemplative energy that when I was younger, I felt really wasn't rewarded, or the fact that I would feel a lot of anxiety, social anxiety or overwhelm, or just like really preferring to be alone in my room. A lot of times I felt like made me strange or not what I'm stuttering a little bit, not what was valued by the world around me and maybe my familial dynamics and my peers. And so there was a lot of performing that I did early in my life, just to fit in and to sort of be what I felt like was more similar to those around me. And a lot of times what I needed to do to feel comfortable in my skin was to anesthetize the discomfort that came up for me in feeling different. So, I sort of joke that in high school I used to be a little bit of a party girl. I certainly drank a lot of alcohol, and it was really important to me to fit in and to not be different. And I felt different. I grew up in Omaha, Nebraska, and I was one of very few people of color at the time. That certainly shifted in, I think, Nebraska now. But when I grew up, I was one of the few Black girls in my school, and just very conscious of my difference. And so not only was I like this very sensitive soul, but I felt different in all of these ways. And that, a lot of times I would go visit a country club or something with a friend, and I could tell that many people in the room had never been around a Black person before. And I was very sensitive to the energy of how that felt, and feeling different and othered and maybe not accepted for those differences, right? So I'm saying all this to say, when I found pot, it felt like such a sweet release and relief for so many years of the tension and the discomfort that I had felt in my skin. And it became like just the space that I wanted to inhabit. I wanted to be able to lose myself in thought and exploration, and, going on hikes and being in the world in ways that felt more bright and colorful and exploratory and all of these things, right? So that experience of falling in love. And what ended up happening after many years of being in that indulgent space was that I realized I was sort of stagnated in my development. I was in that armor that kept me kind of safe away from the world, but I wasn't really engaging in the world, and I wasn't engaging in life. And I could see that all of a sudden there were all of these things that I longed to do and become, that I wasn't really making any progress around. I was just sort of hanging out in my head, right? And so this is when we talk about masculine and feminine energetics, why we need to be in an integrated space of both. If we just sort of hang out in our internal world, if we get lost in the feminine, we're not sort of in the space of this life that we came into this life to be in, right? So a lot of times we'll talk about the ego or the structural components of who we are in these bodies, but we need an ego. We need to be in the space of action. And this is why we don't want to sort of demonize the masculine components of who we are, in the same way that we don't want to disregard the very necessary aspects of our feminine, right? We need both. And so there was a point when I realized I needed to learn to be in my skin and do it without the release valve, the protective cloak of being high all the time. And so for me, that was sort of the first venture into really learning how to be honest with myself about the things that had kept me from feeling whole. And it's interesting because I'd always been a spiritual seeker. I'd sort of been obsessed with attempting to understand how we get here in this body and what happens to us when we die, when we leave these bodies. And so, spiritual teachers like Wayne Dyer and Caroline Myss and Reverend Michael Bernard Beckwith, like all of their teachings had been very much something that even as I was getting high all the time, I would legitimately, that's what I would spend so much of my time doing, was listening to their teachings and attempting to formulate an idea of life and this universe and what we're doing here and all of the things. And that was really how I like to spend my time. So I already had sort of that foundation of spirituality. And yet I, had been a yogi for many years. I'd been a yoga teacher at that point when I first got sober for a long time. But I realized that there was something that wasn't grounded in truth as I thought about this ability to be in my skin and that I didn't really meditate. I didn't really know how to sit with myself in stillness. I certainly knew how to be in my body and move. And there was a lot of ways that being high sort of brought a sensory of experience of being in my body that now I sort of understand as the connection to my feminine sensory experience or the sensuality of being in our physical bodies that I'd been really disconnected from in my younger years. But, when I would be high and I would be doing yoga, it would feel so incredible to be in my body and in that experience of my sensual self in that way that, again, that sort of became an addictive thing. But I didn't know how to do it without this external component that I believed for many years that I needed to get there, right? And as I went through the process of learning to do that, I just had to dive into the layers of shadow and what it means to sit with ourselves for the first time. And I remember there were some books that were helpful. Pema Chödrön's work was really helpful for me when I first got sober. And she talks about this thing of the white hot loneliness, I believe is how she describes it. And this thing of what it is to sit with ourselves in the space of what we've all been sort of running from most of our lives, which is just this existential angst around those things that I'm talking about, like that real confrontation with death. And that when we sit with ourselves in our solitude, if we are able to and willing to stay with ourselves there long enough, we will have a confrontation with some of those elements that we've been avoiding about ourselves, about our own immortality, right? And that was some of what I found there. So, I think this thing of spiritual solitude and what happens when we don't have any distractions, which whether it is a drug or shopping, for many of us now, that is all of the social media and the internet and the artificial intelligence or relationships, marriages sometimes, all of those things become really convenient, potent distractions from what Pema Chödrön describes as that white hot loneliness, right? That sacred solitude, the space of our alone. And I think ultimately there's so much about what we understand about community and how we heal in fellowship that, again, becomes this balance of the integration of the ego and the soul, the masculine, the feminine, which is the individual and the collective. And we need both. I think if we don't know how to sit with ourselves in the space of our alone, what ends up happening is we utilize other people as something to extract a sense of wholeness from, versus being in relationship with those other people from the awareness that we are whole. And it's what's so fascinating about all of these conversations, you guys, is it's holding multiple truths at the same time, that we will heal in community. And I certainly healed and continue to heal in community, and community has been such a crucial aspect of my healing path, whether that has been in 12-step rooms or in fellowship with all of these various forms of, community that I've engaged in over, God, at this point, like 30 years. I don't know how many years. No, not 30 years today. You were at like 12, but yeah, certainly like 20 years of being in community in various forms. And that has been such a crucial component of what it means to heal. And this is the biggest and ever for me. We have to be able to sit in some fires with and by ourselves. Big breath as I say that, because it's one of these truths that we can't escape. And from my perspective, so much of the troubles we face as a society is that the majority of people, from my perspective, do not know how to sit in their solitude and enjoy the company they keep. Whose quote is that, right? I'm drawing a blank on whose quote that is, but it's basically, the quote is something around all of man's troubles can stem from this one really crucial question, which is, when you're alone, do you like the company that you keep? And if we do this really searching, fearless inventory of truth around that question, I find that a lot of times, if we're honest with ourselves, the answer is, I won't even say no so much as I don't know, because we're just really conditioned to avoid even sitting in that truth. I think when I finally was confronted with my alone at various points of my development, and yes, that was when I first learned to be in my skin without any sort of a release valve, but also, after being married for almost 12 years and being by myself for the first time in a house by myself, and being responsible for myself after never living alone, apart from oh my God, a couple months after college. For the most part, I'd always had a roommate. I'd always had someone here if I needed them to distract me from my solitude, which is such an interesting, even as I'm saying it out loud, dichotomy for someone who's so introverted, because I feel like on so many levels I was always trying to escape that thing and find sacred solitude, and yet some part of me was afraid of what I would find there. But what I did find there, as I sat in that solitude, and I sat in that solitude in a really interesting time, because I separated from my child's father in 2019, and not that long after, we went into a lockdown. We went into the space where we were really alone and in isolation in a way that we hadn't been. Now, I joke a lot that was as an introvert, my dream come true. And in some ways it was, but in some ways it was deeply confrontational in those moments at night where, some of that white hot loneliness, some of that existential fear came to the surface. And there I was, me with me, right? And what I found was I was okay. And I got to tell you guys, I get a little emotional even as I think about that space of discovery of how okay I was, because honestly, that would be my wish and prayer for everyone, to experience that truth for themselves. Because I often say there are some truths and moments of understanding that we come to that once you see it, you can't unsee it. And knowing that I am okay in my skin with myself, by myself, has changed me on a cellular level forevermore, so that I can have such beautiful, enriching, soul-stirring, captivating, life-affirming relationships in my life, and know that no matter what, there is no one that I need to extract anything from in this lifetime in order to be made whole. Wholeness is my birthright, and it's how I came into this skin. And I know that now for sure, for sure. But I couldn't have known that if I hadn't been brave enough. And I want to give that to myself. I want to give that credit to myself. If I hadn't been brave enough to confront the parts of me that were afraid of that solitude and afraid of my alone. And I can tell from your question, my love, that same bravery resides within you. And it is, I'm going back and looking at your question. I think there is a bravery there in going back to recapture that aspect of self, to reclaim that aspect of self that we are conditioned to turn away from. We are a society that really teaches children to believe that they are meant to be striving to become something, to achieve something, to discover something that is not innate within who they are. What I came to understand in that space of my solitude was what I was really doing was going back for the little girl inside of me and rediscovering all of the innate wisdom that she held before the world interfered with her wisdom, right? So I started to just do the things that that little girl within me loved to do before anybody interfered, right? And I share in groups and when I talk about this time a lot that I went back and I remember one of the first things I did when I found myself in that sacred space of solitude was turn on Les Miserables, which was a musical that I really loved when I was little, I don't know, 10. I don't remember the first time I saw it, but I was young and I remember seeing it. Yeah, I don't remember where I saw it, but I remember that I was just so moved by the music and the characters and the love story. And there is a character named Eponine who sings a song called On My Own, which, I mean, Dene, so in my cheese right now, but it's true. When I was a young girl, I loved that song On My Own. And I turned it on and I just remember I was alone in my room and I was singing the words and they just all came back to me. And I felt like this surge of empowerment come over me of like, I get to be her again. I get to be that girl that is in this space of discovery and reclaiming what it means to be a woman walking this earth on my own, and that I'm okay here. I really am. And everything that this world would have me believe about what it means to be a woman, at that time entering my 40s and just feeling like, I have a child and I'm navigating all of these things for the first time by myself, with myself, and here I am. And what are you going to do, Dene? Are you going to sort of buy into the world's narrative that means that somehow you are less than complete? Or are you going to bet on your wholeness because you say so? And I made the decision to bet on my wholeness on my terms because I say so, and not because someone was there choosing me or affirming my wholeness, but because I decided to see it within myself. And so what I've come to believe is that, all of these experiences of our lives are uniquely orchestrated as the curriculum for what we are meant to understand at whatever point in our own development. For me, what I can now see I needed was to learn to be with myself, and to trust in myself and to know that I had my own back so that I could really hold the framework of possibility for a different way of relating. Because so much of what I see when I sit with couples and when I do all of the relational work that I'm sort of obsessed with doing is that this thing of being conditioned to believe that we're not whole with and by ourselves really creates dynamics where we believe we need to extract a sense of wholeness from other people, which, if we break down what that extraction process actually looks and feels like, it feels like anything other than love. It doesn't feel loving when we are, attempting to control other people so that we feel safe. It's really understandable that we do it because if we believe that my safety resides outside of my skin and you are sort of the variable that I can't control, I will believe I need to control you in order to keep myself safe. So, we have to just hold so much compassion for ourselves around why we've done it and come into the understanding that we were never meant to love one another from this space of scarcity and lack, and believing that we are anything other than divine beings in human form for a little while, right? And I think that we are living through a moment in history where all of the ways that we have been extracting and in structures rooted in dominance and fear are coming to the surface so that we can all do this work of going inward and getting still and really asking ourselves to tap into that wisdom of the most sacred part of our essence, which to me is that inner child, and say, who would you be in this life if you weren't moving from the space of scarcity and fear? Who would you challenge yourself to become if you believed that wholeness is emanating through every aspect of all that you are? How would you show up then, right? And my God, what a time to be alive, to get to experience that and be the holders of that possibility and that vision. Yeah. So big breath as I say that. And I'm just sort of reading back through this question and hoping I touched on all the points that you were speaking to. But, this thing of being in the surreal experience of a divorce that you didn't choose. I just want to speak directly to you who sent this message to me, my love, and say, you in your your human self didn't choose this. And I believe there's a part of you that did choose this divorce. I believe there's a higher self, a soul self, a part of you that is divine, that knows the greater trajectory and unfolding of your life's potential, that knew that this marital container, in whatever form, was not able to hold who you are becoming any longer. And so, I believe that the universe often supports us in doing for us what we are not quite ready yet to do for ourselves. And so I want to ask you to maybe be open to the possibility that some part of you chose this because this is the reality that you are living. And how can I say yes to this moment, this reality, this truth, as if I chose it, because on some level I did, right? And there's that beautiful quote that I often draw from in Glennon Doyle's book, Untamed, where she said, there's no such thing as one-way liberation. And that was one of the most liberating things I've ever read, because when we understand that anything that is not rooted in freedom and liberation for all parties involved is never in alignment with the highest truth. And so life will sort of reconfigure and reorganize circumstances to support us in living in alignment with truth, if we are brave enough to hold that as a possibility. And I believe you are, from your question, to be honest. There's so much about the way that you crafted this question that just indicates to me that that level of bravery resides within you, my love. And so I'm really excited for you, because I know that you are stepping into the next phase of your personal power and development, and getting to know yourself in a really sacred, intimate container that is your solitude. And yes to the grief, yes to the grief for all of the ways that I know I abandoned myself because this life and this society and all of my training taught me to do it. And just holding the possibility that all is exactly as it needs to be, and that I will be shown when it is time all of the ways that that is true. Yeah. I'm going to hold that vision for you, even if it feels really, really difficult to believe in that right now. I believe it for you, my love. So, I pulled a card this morning, which I love. And this deck, it's interesting. This is the Muse Tarot. Just showing it for anyone who happens to be watching this episode. And this tarot is so close to my heart because it's one of the first tarot decks that I ever, got for myself. But it's also the tarot deck that I found in 2020. So it's the deck that I was using and really sort of in relationship with, in that, that really disruptive, destabilizing evolutionary year that just really shifted so much for all of us. But it was my first year of really being in that level of intentional solitude. And this deck was really a companion along my path and during that time in terms of cultivating a deeper relationship with spirit. And I think I've shared before, but I'll share again that I just made a practice of every single day committing to myself that I would say to myself, I'm going to be still every day and I'm going to move every day. And so I would meditate for at least 15 minutes every single day. And then I would pull a card, and just as I pulled a card, really connect to spirit, source, God, whatever feels true for you. I would sort of connect to source and ask what message I needed to really be aware of, where my blind spots were, what I could understand for the day. And, sometimes people ask me like what that would sound like, what the prayer would be. And I would say, and still do a lot of times, spirit, source, angels, ancestors, and ascendant masters, what would you have me see? What would you have me know? Where is the current energy going? And I said that prayer, asked for that moment of clarity right before I pulled the card and started recording. And the card that I pulled was the Fool. And this deck is so beautiful because not only is the artwork so beautiful on all of these cards, but each message ends with a really beautiful poem. And so this is the Magician. Oh, I said the Fool. I meant the Magician. This is actually the Magician, Dene. So I was looking at the deck and the Fool was the page I was open to, but it goes on to the Magician, which is the actual card I pulled. So strike that, go back, and Dene, it is the Magician. But nonetheless, the Magician is the key word, a potent message of your creator magic, powerful manifesting abilities, forging your reality, connecting to the 4 elements, having latent talents and skills, creativity, steering clear of manipulation and the misuse of power, a time to seek good intentions, seeing truth versus illusion. Prompt: alchemical incantation. Reaching up, the magician weaves and spins her reality into form. With magic from the ethers and determination in hand, she wields all the potential of the cosmos. She reminds you that you too have all you need to bring your desires into form. The 4 elements support this journey, so she steps onto the strings of her magic loom to bring its essence into reality. With sound, heart, and thought vibration, she promises to weave a better world. A divine, luminescent substance forms between her hands. It always comes so quickly when her intention is to create something healing for others, something transcendent and totally rooted in love. She invites you to welcome a state of trance in order to tap into the liminal spaces of your creative potential, to feel and to know your desire and your end goal, and to draw down all the energetic materia to make it real. Give it form, pattern, color, space, and so it is. Incantation manifesting, faith and action, breathe and resting with my heart, and as in love, I hold the mirror of as above. Ooh, I don't know why this just made me so emotional. I do know why, actually, because there's so many elements of this question that came up for me as I was reading the description of this card. And, I was, in addition to going back for my little girl in that year, after my marriage ended and I was in that space of solitude, I was also not alone in that I was reading so many just profound teachings of those I'd felt really inspired by, but whose work I wanted to dive into in a deeper way to create some clarity around how I wanted to hold things. And I read a lot of Audre Lorde's work and James Baldwin, Dene, James Baldwin, and Bell Hooks' work. And I remember there was so much about Audre Lorde's work around, you know, how to move through fear. And it was a lot of what I understood about service from getting sober, and that there's something about when we channel fear into how we can be of service in the world. Again, I should have looked up this quote, but I didn't know I was going to be talking about this particular quote. Maybe I'll put it in the show notes. I will. But she talked about, like, when I use my fear and channel it into something of purpose and of being of service in the world, it matters less when I'm afraid, because I use it in service to something bigger than me. And I remember that was so helpful to me to really think about just this thing of being of service. And I often quote Wayne Dyer in saying, the mantra of the lower self is I need more. The mantra of the higher self is how do I serve? And I found a lot of comfort in just really thinking about how I could use whatever I was coming to understand about myself and about this life in service in some way, and really asking to be shown. And I think all of us have a way that shows up for us if we are willing to ask and then have eyes to see. But I think that there is a way that we can alchemize fear into our own personal flavor of power when we ask, how do I serve? Like, how are the things that I have moved through, the challenges that I've faced, been the particular brand of curriculum that I needed to show up in this world, in this moment in history, especially, I would say, in a way that is able to be of service to the collective. And so I think that's another really important element that this card is reminding me of, that I'm so grateful of. And I think what I love about tarot is there's just so much around, like, whatever it is that I find myself needing to be reminded of in this day. It's similar to the way that I've been thinking about dream work. Our psyche holds so much in the unconscious realms that if we tap into some of these tools, like our dream tending or like tarot or even meditation, we will get answers that from our conscious mind's awareness sometimes can be hidden or dormant or not things that we're aware of. But if we're willing to get still, and that is the beauty of being in those dark spaces of our solitude and in our feminine wisdom, is that we find so many answers. Another reason I was smiling when I was looking at this deck and the message for today is I remembered that a lot of the reason I don't read tarot in reverse, and some people do, and if you're not familiar with tarot, what that means is, like, when you are shuffling the cards, a card will pop out, and sometimes it will be upright and sometimes it will be in reverse. And the reverse is sort of like the some people might say dark or negative connotation of whatever the card is, but I never read cards in reverse, because I just believe that there's a benevolent force that is always holding me, and whatever the message is for the day, it's always filled with as much immense love and possibility and creative life force as possible. And that's my belief, and it's just sort of what's been really supportive of feeling like these decks are holding me and loving me and guiding me over the last several years. But I was reminded of that in that this deck doesn't even have a reverse as an option. Many decks do. But because this deck was sort of the deck that I learned to play with tarot through, that's a big part of why I don't read cards in reverse. And I had kind of forgotten about that until I just saw that. Yeah. And so I love this. You know, I think my invitation to any of you who maybe resonated with that question of finding wholeness within, outside of a partnership, I think our work right now, more than ever, I believe, and we are living through a really transcendent maybe moment in history. Our work is to become the love that we may be attempting to extract from outside of ourselves, because the more that all of us take personal responsibility for being the love that we want to see in the world, all of a sudden the most transformational ripple is created. I've seen it so many times, you can't convince me otherwise. Certainly in my work with clients, both relationally and individually, certainly within my life, within myself, but I know this to be true, and I really believe this is what is being asked of us to really tap into as a truth. And I want to share with you guys some things that I have coming up that hopefully may be supportive of us doing some of this work, of tangible tools for being the love and doing it in community, and how we talk about it and learn to be about it, right? So a couple things. I'm going to host a workshop that I'm going to call Embodying the Love You Want. It's sort of a play on this thing of like, a lot of couples therapy modalities with no shade whatsoever have really taught us to do things to get the love we want. And I would say maybe even extract the love we want. But I want to talk about this thing of being the love. So embodying the love that you want. It's going to be a free workshop on March 19th from 4 to 5:30. And if you go to my website or the link in my Instagram bio, there'll be a link for you to register and sign up. It's free, and I would love to be in conversation with you just on this thing of embodying the love that we want to experience. And additionally, I am going to do an 8-week couples intensive. People have been asking me about something online for couples for a while now. And I finally was like, let's do it. Let's make it happen. So it's going to be a couples intensive for 8 weeks. And in that, you can be currently in a partnership, or I would also say those navigating relationships in ways that might be, just expanded ways of understanding how we relate. So that might be 2 people co-parenting. That might be more than 2 people. That might be people in relational dynamics in, a polyamorous dynamic, or, coworkers or partnerships, or, but yeah, just like, it's going to be a relational intensive, but for us to like work out how we're relating together. So I'm calling it a couples intensive, but if your relationship looks different than maybe a twosome, you are welcome. All are welcome. I love exploring all of the ways that we are relating to one another. So that's going to be on Tuesdays, April 14th through June 9th. And there will also be information on that on my website and link in my Instagram bio. And yeah, I am opening up a couple slots. I have a few slots for working one-on-one. And I'm just naming this because I decided that I want to do it in really intentional containers this year. So if you are someone who is interested in working with me one-on-one, what I'm doing is like a 12-week commitment. Because while I don't as much anymore work in sort of a psychodynamic, really ongoing process, I do want to work in containers where we commit to 12 weeks, 3 months of working together in a really intentional way towards creating the type of change that we want to experience, right? So if that's something you might be interested in, there is more information, I think. You can just send me a message, and we will find one another if it is aligned and we are meant to work together in that way. But I think in my Instagram bio, there's a link for more info on that, if that sounds like that's for you and something that you're interested in. But yeah, I just feel, Such a strong knowing right now that what is dying in every way possible that an energetic paradigm can die off is this energy of extractive energy, and believing that we need to extract something from outside of ourselves in order to be made whole. I do not believe that that is going to be the resonant truth moving forward. I think we are starting to understand the wholeness that has always been there, and that we are going to be in this world, but not of this world, as divine beings who understand how things shift and reorganize themselves around us into the space of miracles once we remember that we are divine. Big breath into that truth. Oh, feels good. All right, my loves, thank you. It's 51 minutes, almost an hour. Feels good. If you have questions, thoughts, feedback, like what I just read in terms of a question, I would love to hear it. I would love for the podcast to be a little bit more of a collaborative energy. I'm going to have some of my friends come on as guests soon, so there'll be a little bit more conversation in that way. But yeah, I just want this to be a collaborative thing and really be in the space of like, how can I support you with what's alive in a way that just feels resonant for I was going to say both of us, but all of us, because we are all connected. But thank you for being here. Thank you for spending this time with me. I am excited about dropping in a way that feels really resonant, and I can't wait to do more. I hope you have a beautiful rest of your day, evening, tomorrow, whatever it is. And I will see you again soon. Take good care, my loves.